So how many of you have heard about neuromarketing? Okay, quite a few. Great. Well, what is this all about? Why are people so excited about neuromarketing these days? Well, let me tell you a little bit more about neuromarketing. But neuromarketing was born a few years ago when neuroscientists started to realize how the brain works. These last few years, we've made incredible progress in understanding the brain of consumers, the brain of people. And from this brain research, we can draw a lot of very interesting learnings that applies to people that are in sales and marketing. So what we will do today is we will review the science of the brain. We will review the latest research that is explaining how the brain works. And then we will immediately apply it to your businesses, your product, your services, and see how you can more effectively market and sell your solution so that it reaches the part of the brain that decides. Yes, you've heard me say the part of the brain that decides, because there is indeed a very specific part of the brain that makes all our decisions. And when people make decisions, they go through a three-step process. And the first step is here. It's made in the neocortex. That section of the brain here, the outside, the wrinkly, pinky part of the brain. All this section here. This is called the neocortex, which means the new brain. You know, in Latin, human beings are called Homo sapiens, because Homo sapiens means the one we think. Because we think a lot. And if you've ever experienced this with your client, you may have the greatest value proposition, and they might tell you, well, I still need to think about it. And what that means is that, you know, at that time they're processing the information in this part of the brain, the neocortex. But researchers, by putting people in MRI machines, by actually visualizing what happens in the brain, have demonstrated that it is not the trigger that makes decision. The new brain is not the part of the brain that decides. So if it's not the decision maker in the brain, let's not worry about it. Then people go through a second step before they make a decision. They go, how do I feel about making that decision? And the feeling function is made in this portion of the brain here. The middle part of the brain, this section here, this is called the midbrain. And the midbrain gives you an emotional feedback. In other words, it goes, how do I feel about making that purchasing decision? Now, these different sections of the brain have different functions, but they communicate to each other. But again, their purpose is as different as your lung and your kidneys. As you know, the function of your lung is to provide air, is to provide oxygen to your blood. Well, the function of your neocortex is to think about the decision. The purpose of the midbrain is to feel, to give you your gut feeling about making that decision. But none of those two are the decision maker. Here is the puzzling discovery that neuroscientists have made these last years, is that every time you do a decision, you make a decision, that decision is made by a very specific part of the brain, which is here. It's the top of the stem and this section here called the amygdala. Now, some people call it the old brain, some others call it the reptilian brain, and neuroscientists have demonstrated that every time we make a decision, it is that part of the brain that releases the decision, that triggers the decision. Now, why is that so important? Well, it is very important because if you've been in sales long enough, you know that you should always sell to the decision maker. And there is a good news and there is a bad news. The bad news is that brain makes decisions at the level of a crocodile. Because we share this brain with all vertebrates. So things like frogs, snakes, crocodile, everything that has a spine pretty much has an old brain. So that's the bad news. But there is a good news. And what is the good news? Well, the good news is that brain is so primitive that only 6 stimuli, only 6 forms of impulses can reach it. Anything else will be processed either by this guy or by the midbrain. So what we're going to do today is we're going to review the science of how this brain works. We're going to look at the latest research and the teachings that they draw, and we are going to immediately translate this into, but what should you do to be more effective in sales and marketing in your own enterprise? And this workshop is the only workshop in the world that is doing this. You will find this information nowhere else. All right, so let me give you the shortest history of the brain. So it all started about 15 billion years ago with the Big Bang. This is not the creation of the universe, but at least some significant event in the creation of what we call the universe today. Then not much happens for about 10 billion years. And about 5 billion years ago, the solar system is created. So this is where matter started to agglomerate, and we had a sun in the middle, and the planets were rotating around. Now if we zoom onto this, the first form of life appears on Earth approximately 4 billion years ago. Now this was not very intelligent form of life. So we're talking algaeas, single cells, not very smart. No old brain yet. And then we have to wait for about 400, 500 million years for the Cambrian explosion. The Cambrian explosion means the explosion of life on Earth. So let's keep on zooming. The first vertebrates appear on Earth about 450 million years ago, and with them appears the old brain. And then we get closer to today. And if you look in terms of evolution, we started to rise as a species only a few million years ago. So let me put things in perspective here, so that you really understand how old the old brain is, right? So this is 500 million years ago. 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. This is today, 2005. So when you're selling today to a very smart scientist at NASA, a guy with 4 PhDs, right? He too is using his old brain to decide. Yet the organ with which he's deciding was created 500 million years ago back there. So just to put things in perspective, do you know where we were as a species about 60 million years ago? Where were we here 60 million years ago? Any guess? Well, we were not. Yeah, that's right, we were not. This is the time of the dinosaurs, 60 million years ago. So now let's get closer here. About 2 to 4 million years ago, right back here. Do you know where we were as a species? What were we doing? Yes, that's right. We were just starting to get erected. That's called Homo erectus. But we still had a lot of hair on our back, and we were looking more like monkeys than real humans, right? Okay, all right. So now let's think about it. 40,000 years ago. So now we're talking 4 millimeters away. Do you know where we were as a species? What was happening quite significant 40,000 years ago? Well, 40,000 years ago is when language was invented as a way to communicate between each other. So in terms of evolution, language is only this. And yet today, when we're selling to our clients, consumers, anybody, they're still using an organ that was created way back there. So this is how primitive the old brain is. Now 10,000 years ago, which would be 1/10 of a hair thin from today. Do you know what significant happened? What were we doing 10,000 years ago as a species? We were living in caves, right? So this is really the bad news, guys. We make decisions at the level of a crocodile, which was back there. But that bad news is good news for us, because this brain is so primitive that it will become almost predictable. So our job will be to look at how predictable this old brain can be, and what can we learn that we could immediately apply to your own sales and marketing to make your life easier. Because your objective is to make your clients understand what you can do for them.